John, you've introduced us to the Cotton Club from your point of view. Would you take us on a short tour? I'll just name some spots.
Please.
Well, certainly we could start at 125th Street.
125th Street.
Apollo Theater.
Well,
just your
Oh, the Apollo
overview.
Theater, when I first knew it, was a burlesque house, a Hurtig and Seaman house, with probably the worst pit band almost in the history of bad pit bands. But it was a wonderful. I remember taking Charles Lawton up there in 1932 when he was in a show downtown called Payment Deferred, and it was still a white theater. But the girls took off more clothes at the midnight shows than they did in the regular shows. So we went up to a midnight show then, and then downstairs at the Apollo there was a place called the Oasis, which later on became the Apollo Rehearsal Hall, and that was the first time that Louis Armstrong played in Harlem under his own name at the Oasis, I think in about 1929. And after that, he went to work at Connie's Inn. No, wait a second. No, my years are wrong here. Louis was at the Oasis in 28, and in 1929, he was at Connie's Inn, and there was a marvelous show that hit Broadway called Connie's Hot Chocolates. And Fats Waller was the pianist, and the trumpet player on a special high stool was Louis Armstrong. And then there were all sorts of magnificent singers in this show. And of course, Ain't Misbehavin' and Black and Blue, and I can't tell you how many wonderful tunes came from this show. But that was downtown at the Hudson Theater on 44th Street, which is now ironically called the Savoy, and it's closed.
And if I mention a spot called Minton's Playhouse.
Well, we skip a few years from Minton's
Let me go back then. All right, to the Capitol Palace.
Oh my God, the Capitol Palace was swinging in the 20s, and this is before we had parkways in New York. And my family lived about 40 miles out of New York at a place called Mount Kisco, and I would bribe the chauffeur to go up Lenox Avenue, because on Lenox Avenue they had all sorts of little theaters. And there was a marvelous joint called the Saratoga Club, and then there was the Savoy Ballroom, and then there was the Lenox Club, and then there was the Cotton Club, which did have a marquee. And then we go back down 7th Avenue, which was even more exciting for me because there was a black record company in those days called the Black Swan Company, which Fletcher Henderson was the musical director of. And they had a huge banner outside advertising all their new releases. The only trouble was you couldn't buy the releases downtown in New York. It was not a store, not a store that carried them. So I guess by keeping my eyes open while driving through Harlem and starting to buy black newspapers, at a very early age when you couldn't buy black newspapers south of 125th Street, actually, south of 116th Street, I think. I decided I would make it my business to find out what was going on, and I did, and I started going into these places. I met some of my closest friends in the world in record stores in Harlem. Kenneth Clark, the great sociologist, I met when he was about 21 up there, and Charles Alston, a magnificent black painter, and Romy Bearden. We all hung out together in the record stores up in Harlem. And I was still a teenager.
John, there's a spot where you had a chance to observe some rather unusual artistry. And I'm trying to think of it. There's a theater, and there's a little club behind the theater. Covan's, is it?
Covan's Morocco Club.
Ah, that's it. The Covan's Club Morocco.
Covan's Morocco Club. Leroy Covan was a gangster. Marvelous man. He owned... He was. He had two joints, both of them speakeasies. One was the Rennie, which was underneath the Renaissance Ballroom, which was on 138th Street and 7th Avenue. And then his pride and joy was Covan's Morocco Club, which was a speakeasy right behind the stage door of the Lafayette Theater. And the first guy I ever recorded myself, you know, I had to pay for the date and guarantee to buy 150 records, I think it was. I recorded Garland Wilson. But more important than that, if you sat around the Covans, you'd find a lot of the people who were playing the Lafayette Theater. And one of the people who was playing the Lafayette Theater in 1931 was the second piano player of a band called Benny Moten's band. And that second piano player was the good piano player. The first piano player was Buster Moten, Benny's brother, who wasn't very good. But the second piano player was a guy called Bill Basie, later to become Count Basie. And that's when I got to know Basie. And I had a beat-up, upright piano. They didn't have plumbing, which was very fascinating. So I got to know Harlem backyards pretty well in those days. Because I used to be there very late in the morning. I stagger in about 6 o'clock in the morning.
On Lemonade.
On Lemonade. I didn't smoke a drink until I was about 26 or 7, I guess. I was strictly a Boy Scout, except in my musical taste.
If I mention Small's Paradise.
Well, Small's Paradise, of course, was the great. This was the great integrated nightclub in New York. It was underneath the Dunbar National Bank, which had been started by the Rockefellers. They give an opportunity for black people who deposit their money in their own bank. But it was downstairs for that. Now it's upstairs. It's still open, and they have rock and roll mostly. But Wilt Chamberlain, the great basketball player, bought the club years ago, and it's still open. But in those days, they had Charlie Johnson's band, which what a wonderful band this was, with my favorite of all trombone players, Jimmy Harrison, there were ever so many great sidemen. You'd get an awful good dinner for $1, 75 cents, excuse me, and I could have my lemonades, fresh lemonades, and what else? Had a wonderful-looking line of girls, and these were dark girls, because the Cotton Club and Connie's Inn would only have very light-skinned girls, and this seemed to me most unfair, and these were the days when I was starting to play string quartets. This is when I was still at Hotchkiss and coming down from Hotchkiss every couple of weeks, and to study theory and study viola and play in the string quartet. Of course, there was always time later on for at least a show at the Alhambra or the Lafayette or a nightclub. And so I got to know Harlem early.
John, just one other observation. The Savoy Ballroom is gone.
Yes, sure.
I had a chance to catch the last few nights of it long time ago.
Yeah.
But you saw it in its golden day.
I sure did. 2 bandstands, two of the most horrible out-of-tune pianos in history, although once in a while they would rent a piano if Benny Goodman or somebody was going to play there, you know. But this was a magnificent place. It was owned by a you know, a sort of predatory agent by the name of Mo Gale, but he had the great good taste to have an ex-socialist organizer by the name of Charlie Buchanan to run the place for him. And Charlie Buchanan also started the first left-wing weekly paper in Harlem with Adam Powell back in the mid-30s called People's Voice. And I'm happy to say I was one of the very few white columnists for that paper.
Fascinating. The Savoy, of course, was famous for something we know nothing about, really, and that is the Battle of the Bands.
The Battle of the Bands, well, they would have, some nights they'd have 6 different bands. The place would open at 8 in the morning, 8 at night, I mean, and go till 8 or 10 in the morning. And they had some couple of pretty corny bands like Fess Williams, but they would have Chick Webb, and they would have Frankie Newton was in a marvelous band there. God, I can't remember the guy's name who was the lead. Lloyd, oh God, sorry.
I'm fighting for it. Not Lloyd Glenn, of course.
No, that's much later.
Much later.
20 years later. No, Lloyd Scott, sorry. Simple as that. Yeah. Lloyd and Cecil Scott, that's right. And, I mean, and then I made one contribution to the Savoy Ballroom, for which I might possibly be remembered. I brought a little band in from New Jersey, which was headed by a guy called Al Cooper. And the Savoy originally, immediately changed the name of the band to the Savoy Sultans. And the Savoy Sultans could probably outswing almost any of the big bands that they ever played against. In fact, people were terrified to play against the Sultans. I'll skip 25 years because the Savoy Sultans had a band, a drummer called Raz Mitchell, marvelous drummer, and a great showman. And I remember when Louis Armstrong had his all-star band out in Calumet City outside of Chicago. I don't know which was the real honky-tonk place in New York. And one night the strip place there booked in Louis Armstrong with his all-stars, and the all-stars included Earl Hines on piano, Big Sid Catlett on drums, Jack Teagarden on trombone. I mean, fantastic band. And guess it was Buster Bailey on clarinet. I mean, it was really an all-star band. And Big Sid, you know, sort of came strutting in. And then the house band at this club was Raz Mitchell on drums. And Big Sid, who was a marvelous drummer, almost walked out of the place because he didn't want to get cut.
Very simple athletic competition.
Yeah, sure was. There were really battles of the bands in these days.
Just a little more detail about that.
All right.
That activity called the Battle of the Bands.
Yeah.
Bands simultaneously playing it, not
simultaneously, no, please. I mean,
all right. Let's get that straight, okay?
One after the other. Well, for instance, I remember one.
The last tune was the important thing on one
that's
stand,
right.
wasn't it?
Yeah. Well, of course, I'll never forget when. Am I talking too loud, incidentally? All right. I can remember we had a battle of the band between Benny Goodman and Chick Webb, and the public was terribly pleased to have Chick. I mean, to have Benny Goodman on the bill, but they knew that Chick Webb was going to cut him. even though Gene Krupa was Benny's drummer at the time. Benny didn't have any black guys in the band yet, except for the trio and the quartet, and they were wonderful. But still, Chick Webb did. I think, according to most people, won the thing. But musically, those Fletcher Henderson arrangements of Benny's cut everything in sight. I think.
And the crowd probably thought so too.
I think so, yeah. I think so. But Chick was the local favorite, and more power to him. He was a marvelous guy. This was before Ella had joined Chick's band.